Okay, so good day everyone. Today we will be discussing about the Arabian literature. So for the reporters, we have here Alban P. Escomo and yours truly, Sandra Kim P. Partosa. So Alban Escomo will be discussing some of the important parts of the Arabian literature. So for the outline of our report, we have here the characteristics of Arabian literature and the common literary forms. So to begin, there is perhaps no other literature so closely allied to the history of its people as is that of the Arabs. So, the monotony of nomadic life, the rise of Islam, the Arab conquest, the imperial luxury of early Abbasids, the interaction and cross fertilization with other civilizations, notably in Spain, the decline and overthrow of caliphate, the period of cultural stagnation, their reactions and inspiration owing to the colonial encounter rather, and the eventual reawakening of the Arabs world to form the vibrant independent states of today, these are all faithfully reflected in Arabic literature. Um, the ups and downs of which parallel to the fortunes of the Arabic themselves. So a purist would rightly insist that Arab literature per se, that is, in Arabic and by pure-blooded, Arabs are confined to those centuries immediately before and after the Islamic dispensation. So from the so-called Golden Age, onwards, following the astonishingly far reaching Arab conquests, there were increasingly exchanges of influence and intermingling with other cultures. Literary Arabic became obsolescent after the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and it was largely owing to the determination of the small core who keep the language alive, especially in Egypt, that Arabic literature enjoyed a powerful renaissance in the late 19th century. So, the most important essential point about the Arabic literature is that it stems directly from the Holy Quran, which is pre-Islamic poetry notwithstanding. So, apart from some first century AD graffiti, which was hardly counts as literature, we have no evidence of writings in Arabic before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So illiteracy was widespread, and the select few who could read or write learned these arts from teachers outside Arabia. This was, however, no bar to a fundamental appreciation of poetry among the Bedouin nomads. So many individual tribes preserved an oral tradition by the use of rawis, which who earned a living purely by memorizing and reciting poetry. So, among the pre Islamic Arabs, words in themselves seem to have retained something of their ancient and magical power. The man who, by skillful ordering of vivid imagery in thought, rightly nuanced phrases, could play upon the emotions of his hearer or hearers, was not merely lauded as an artist, but venerated as the protector and guarantor of the honor of the tribe and a potent weapon against its enemy. So now let us proceed to what is Arabian literature. So we refer to Arabic literature to designate a series of literary works and production that were written in Arabic language from the 6th century onwards, among which the Quran is one of the most important and representative works. So, thus, this section includes all the production both in prose and verse of those who speak the Arabic language using the Arabic alphabet and who receive an important influence from the Muslim culture. It is important to bear in mind that the appearance of Muhammad marks a before and after not only in the event itself but also in the culture and especially in the development of Arabic literature, since his birth determines the strength of Islam that will expand throughout the era, not only covering the need to spread the faith, but also the expanding of the horizons of writing to reach as many people as possible. So, although it began in Arabia, it soon began to spread from Spain to China. So, now let us proceed to the history of or history and origin of the Arabian literature. So, it is so called because Arab refers to nobility, good education, and courtesy, so that Arabic literature is usually associated with an element that was not or that was a part of the educated classes. So this begins to develop properly after the Quran and the arrival of Islam, which is installed as a monotheistic religion of the Arabs, which caused the language and themes of the works undergo a major transformation among other things because it became essential to begin to expand the faith, which generates the more authors begin to write in the popular language to reach a greater number of people. So, moments before the writing of the Quran, as well as prior to the rise of Islam, was called the period of ignorance or jahiliyyah, a term assigned by Muslims to refer an ignorance of a religious nature. That is why very little is known of Arabic literature at this time, which was reduced to a purely oral transmission that had records dating from the last decades in the 6th century. In addition to this, writing expands in its themes, creating a great variety of texts that could now be read by all these people, so that biographies, legends, philosophical writings, and more emerge. However, this situation was a source of debate, especially between two groups that discussed the consolidation of Arabic literature from two moments. So, one group argues that Arabic literature can only be considered in the Golden Age, between the 8th and 13th centuries, the time of its greatest flourishing and literary production, while the second argues that its development continued until the 13th century and that it was nourished by foreign influencer. So the nature of modern or of the modern in the context of Arabic literary history involves twin processes, which is first renewed contacts with the Western world, and which something that was considerably accelerated by European imperial incursions during the 19th century, and the second, which is a renewed interest in the classical heritage of Arabic language and Islam, particularly in analyzing the earlier stages in the process known as Al Nada or Renaissance, which Western historians have for a long time placed much more emphasis on the first of these factors. So, it is certainly true that the 19th century witnessed a vigorous translation movement that introduced to the readership of the Arabic literature and examples of genres such as the novel, the short story, and the drama. So, all these genres were subsequently produced within the literary milieu of Arabic, and although the chronology and pace of the process varied widely in different regions, however, as Arab literary historians endeavored to trace the development of a modern literary tradition in different regions, and as creative writers themselves strove to find indigenous sources of inspiration and modes of expression. So, a perceived need to incorporate the second category mentioned above, that of the linkage between the classical heritage of the Arab past and the creativity of the present, became more pressing and led in many regions to a re examination of the balance between the two forces. So, To proceed, let us proceed to the characteristics of Arabian literature. So, what does contemporary Arabic literature look like? So, first of all, it differs from classical literature. New literary genres have emerged, such as novel, short story, and drama, but drama and prose are quite close. So, modern Arabic literature, despite its difference, is strongly associated with the traditional Arabic literature and European traditions. So both sources drew certain patterns which resulted in the emergence of new literary genres. The writers also looked for inspiration in the surrounding world, which they began to depict the fate of simple ordinary people. Excuse me. um Please excuse me, sorry. So they write also about the social and religious conflicts, the lack of political freedom, poverty, disease, wars, and the aristocracy, so which these topics they criticize. So Arabic literature begins to take on a more down to earth character and deals with the matters of everyday life, which make it closer to every human being. So now let us proceed to the common literary forms. So the development and production of what was considered public poetry, which was brought to to the attention of the inhabitants, was subject to the three determined objectives, which is the first of this is the panegyric, cold mud. This consists of a kind of compliment addressed to the tribe but essentially to its elders, and in fact, such is its relevance that it manages to expand to consolidate itself as the most implemented. Subsequently, we find the opposite satire that receives the name hija, which was used in order to verbally repute the enemies. And finally, we find the retha, which was used as a form of phrase or praise focused on the deceased. On the other hand, in Arabic literature, we find an important variety of genres and subgenres implemented in literary development. So among them, the following stand out, which is first the biography. So after the biography of Muhammad became known, a strong tendency began to continue with the writing of this type of text, starting with the traveler's accounts. Undoubtedly, the biography was a fundamental format that allowed to extend a different vision of what represented the Islamic and Arab culture worldwide. So, second is that we have the compilations. So, another of the most common forms of information storage used in Arabic literature from 750 AD to 1258 AD are the compilations of texts that include the ideas, instructive stories, advice, and poems in one place. Then we have the diaries, which is also important, where in the beginning it was a record that had details about situation that had happened to the author, but also to the environment that surrounded around him. So it included a series of descriptions of events, and it is with the passage of time that also begins to appear the ideas and thoughts of the writer. Then we have the poetry, where in particular in Arabic literary poetry is written that often includes theme related to love in which the lady to whom such a feeling was professed was exalted. So this became one of the main references of poetry between the ninth and 10th centuries. In addition, within Arabic literature, these are the types of Arabic poetry organized as follows. So we have here the panegyric, which is addressed to the rulers and dignitaries. Then we have the Al-Itador. I don't know if I pronounced it that right, which it was focused on the offering of apologies. And we have the Retha, which is considered a reflection of the senses that delves into feelings and expression. Then we have the Al or the Alfar. I don't know if I pronounced it that right. Also called pride. In it, the poet takes pride in his provenance and origin, despite its prohibition within religion. Then we have the Al Ghazal, which is the etymology of the term refers to a poem for compliments or complement and complementary ba. Then we have the epic, which during the early development of Arabic literature, this emerges a large production of epic and um, fictional literature that would be written in Amine or Amiya, the language of the general population, which allowed that when recited or written, the information could be in the knowledge of the majority of the people. Then we have the makamat, which is a form of prose that follow the structure of rhyme. This poetic form allowed the author to relate fiction and reality, so that authors often write or wrote short stories, fictionalized narratives that occurred within real settings. Then we have the grammatic genre. So this is a genre that begins to make its presence felt in modern times in Arabic literature. However, some experts claim that an ancient tradition that worked in this genre had already been identified but had not been consolidated as such. It was not registered. And last but not the least, sa kuan katong under poetry is the novels. So in Arabic literature, what stood out the most in poetry was the philosophical inclination of the text, among which authors such as IBN Al Nafis and Ibn Tofel stood out. So most of the text influenced images of the protagonist in relation to self-taught individuals inside caves living on deserted places. So over the course of 100 years, many types of poetry and related concepts have developed. So there are a lot of them, but the most important are the adab, which is simply and generally speaking, it is literature or fiction. Then we have the kaseda, which this is a classic form of Arabic poetry with no divisions into stanzas, and it was created in pre-Muslim times. So the predominant, indeed almost the sole form of poem was the kaseda, a complex type of ode which made constant use of rhyme, and the purpose of which was to convey in rich imagery the evocative experience of tribal life. So these kasedas were written down in 8th century and 9th century ADs, where scholars of the time realized the importance of preserving the old poetry for both of its own merit as the begetter of the developing poetic tradition and for its inestimable value in shedding to light on the language of the Holy Quran. So some of the sources, particularly of the early Meccan ones, are phrased in a manner not unlike the pre-Islamic Qasedas, rather than the standard form of high-minded expression in Arabic. So to proceed, we have the Diwan, which is a collection of poems by one or more poets sorted alphabetically. And then we have the Mu'alakat, which is a collection of the several most perfect qasides or qasides collected in the 8th century, and all of them were created in pre-Muslim times. So, as the earliest examples we have of Arabic poetry, the authenticity of the majority having been conclusively established, these odes are especially remarkable for their refinement, where one might also say perfection. So the themes themselves are simple. Desert ones portraying the purely observable. There are no devices such as simile, but frequent use of personification and direct association. It is the matter in which those items or these themes are treated and the form in which they appear that reveal a long established prior tradition. So the technical complexities of the earliest known poems are so highly developed that one can assume poets had been composing and reciting their verses for several centuries previously. So, form and style do not spring forth fully armed without generations or even centuries of growth. The finest poems of this period appear in collection made after the rise of Islam, especially worthy of mention are the Mofaddaliyat, which is compiled by the philologist Al-Mufadal, the Hamasa of Abu Taman, which emulated, if not much, by the Hamasa of his pupil Al-Buttore, and the Kitab Al-Agani of Abu Farah as Al-Ishaf Isfahani, and above all, the Lakat, which is um, the last named collection, is made up of seven exquisite odes by as many poets, though another three are some added to make it 10 in all. So these odes, um, collected in Alakat, which constitute the most precious literary heritage of pre-Islamic Arabia, were composed by Imro al-Qais, Tarafa Amr, Ibn Kultum, Harith, and Tara Zuhair and Labid. So these poems and others by their contemporaries contemporary forms the authentic voice of pre-Islamic life in Jaleheya, or the Day of Ignorance. So, in the poetry of the 6th century, we hear the Arabic language as it was spoken throughout the length and breadth of the Arabia. In addition to the abundance of poetry, some prose tales were also passed on through the rawis, but whereas all the poets' name are known and the prose belongs in its entirely the realm of folk traditions. So as such, it is of little interest as literature, although as early as the 8th century, AD folk tales um, from elsewhere were translated into Arabic and given literary form, which greatly enhanced their value in the eyes of the scholars, where the period immediately preceding the coming of the Prophet Muhammad saw increasing dissatisfaction. So, this was particularly among thinking men with the Bedouin way of life or Bedouin way of life and its attendant superstitions. Small wonder, therefore, that poetry went entirely off favor when new religious ideals and supplanted the inherited values. So, the practice of writing poetry came virtually to a standstill as converts flocked to the prophet in their thousands to hear the divine revelation. So, after his death in 632 AD, it became necessary to preserve in written form what had been divinely revealed to the prophet and which was regarded by believers as the word of Almighty God. So the result was the Holy Quran, which will be discussed or which will be tackled by Alvin Escomo later. So several branches of Arabic literature stemmed from the need to elucidate the Quran, including grammar and lexicography. So the Arabic language itself became the sacred language of Islam. The significance of this is hard to appreciate in the predominantly Christian Western world since the Bible is read almost exclusively in modern translation, most impressively in the English rendering known as the King James. So, as we can see, Arabic thus became the widespread language it remains to this day, despite the intervening age of depression. Its influence moving hand in hand with that of the new religion during the first 3 centuries of Islam. So that would be all for my report. The um, proceeding topics or the proceeding suggested literary pieces will then be discussed by my group mate Alvin Escomo. So I'll nihaya everyone, or that's the end of this discussion. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. Again, this is Sandra Kim P. Partasa. Thank you.